Hello and welcome to Get Good. This is the next video in the series I'm doing on Jane Czar, and more and more has been filled out on her. So another thing that I haven't covered at all yet is how to paint the leathery parts of her suit. And I mean, I've seen it painted as all kinds of things, but I am interpreting it as a kind of a leather. I'm not too sure about, because I don't follow the law, so I'm just painting what I think is cool. And while she is very cool, I'm not too sure what that, like, the inner part of her suit actually is. But when I'm turning it around and looking very closely, it looks like it has a bit of wrinkles, which suggests some kind of fabric to me, at least. So yeah, I will be painting it up as some kind of leathery or synthetic leather or something like that, at least. The colors I am using is it's actually only two colors, it is two colors, and then I'm mixing in a highlight color. I've chosen to use Rhinox hide, and I'm using Rhinox hide because Rhinox hide is already used in other elements of her. Like, it's the darkest color for all the non-metallics, which means for me there is really no reason to go pick yet another color just to do it. And the other reason I'm picking that actual color is I wanted it to be kind of a desaturated purple. And while Rhinox hide is brown, it is a very purplish brown, which means it kind of fits perfectly with that idea. So when you put something lighter into Rhinox hide, it becomes a very desaturated purple. So that's the base color. The next color I have is Citadel Demonite hide, and that's also like a purple, but a bright desaturated purple. And it is quite important that it doesn't go too purple. I wanted it like the shadow colors or the shadow like reflections on Jane Czar's armor is also kind of a purplish tone, but it comes from the burnt red, so it is more reddish, and I didn't want this color or these colors to be as red. And then I used as my highlight color, or the color to kind of make the mixes brighter, I used blue-gray from AK. So how I'm getting these mixes, it's actually by taking the Rhinox hide, which is the darkest, very brown color on the palette, and then I'm mixing in some Demonite hide, not a ton, but a bit of Demonite hide into it, and I get the first bottle transition. Then I'm taking the same mix of that, and I'm mixing in a bit of Demonate Hide and a fair amount of the blue-gray. And then I'm taking from that bottle and putting even more of the blue-gray in it. And just to keep it still in, like, have a bit of the same tones, I actually mixed in a tiny bit more of the Rhinox Hide just to make sure that it didn't go too pale purple, but still had a bit of that brown in it. The exact mixes are not super important, and if you can get something that looks similar to what I have on the wet palette, it should be just fine. So it is a bit of a complicated recipe in that sense, that because it's nothing straight out of the pot. Well, the Rhinox Hide is, but the other three puddles are all mixed of like Rhinox Hide, Demonate Hide, and the blue-gray. So if you can kind of get something similar, it should be just fine. I wanted that like the leather parts to be like it shouldn't be reflective as like the armor, and it certainly shouldn't be as reflective as something like latex or something like that. So I am keeping it in kind of a fabric that would diffuse light a bit more, but I am painting in like bright reflections, and I mean, you can see from all the way from Rhinox Hide, which is on the wet palette, almost looking kind of black, but very dark brown, and it is very dark brown, and then all the way up to the brightest mix of the three colors, which is very bright. Keep in mind that I'm not using very much of that last mix. It does show up on the model, but not very much of it. So it doesn't get kind of like the same shine that, for example, the metallics do, because the metallics has a lot of the final highlight colors showing. Also, they do go brighter than that, but because they have a lot more showing, and the same with the armor, because I'm keeping the armor in kind of a white, like a bluish white, with the purple, reddish shadows. But yeah, because I'm keeping all like a lot of brightness, big bright reflections on everything else, it of course looks more shiny and a lot brighter. So even though I am using a fairly bright mix, on the wet palette it does also look a bit brighter than it is in real life, the brightest puddle. But it is bright. I'm just not letting all too much show of it. So for painting in these like the inner part of the leather, I will say, if I was to start this model right now, and I already from the beginning knew exactly what I would like, how I would paint all of the areas, I probably would start with painting these like leather recessed areas in, because they are very small, some of them, and like you really need to be precise with the brush, especially because it is surrounded by a lot of like whitish armor, and that means if the brush slips as it is right now, it will make a mark that is quite distinct, because it like the brownish colors are, or purplish brown colors are fairly dark against those bright armor plates. So yeah, I probably wouldn't wait to paint them in if I was to do it over again. But I mean, I already painted a lot of the other things, and yeah, it was only later I found out how I actually wanted to like what colors and how I wanted it to look. So just to talk about the brush and how I'm getting the details. I'm using an Artotopus 00 brush, a fairly worn one, so it's like it has lost even some of the bristles, resulting in like it's even smaller than a new one. And I'm painting under 2x magnification, which is for this work, for me at least, needed. I couldn't get into like those tiny recessed areas, and I wouldn't be able to blend things out if I hadn't used that magnification. So I will suggest you do the same if you're painting this model or something similar. But do yourself a favor and paint the recessed areas first, or at least at the same time as because then you would have the colors from the armor recipe already on the palette. So if you make a mistake, you can just quickly paint over it. I end up being able to manage, so it's not like a huge problem. I'm just saying that your brush control has to be on point. It really has to for the entirety of this model, because it is so delicate. But yeah, especially here, I will say these are some of the more tricky areas to get into. Yeah, so that's how I'm kind of getting into this, and also how I'm able to blend things out. So for the leather, I'm trying to not go too bright on it, which means I'm kind of almost halfway blocking in. Not exactly, because I do try to be like neat about it and do the transitions kind of smooth already as I'm going, but I'm already not too terribly hung up in having these like the leather be like super neat and super smooth. I don't care if it has a tiny bit of texture. I actually kind of prefer that it has. Two reasons. One is it is a fabric or a leather or something like a synthetic fabric of some kind. So for me, it's okay that it isn't like a smooth rubber, because I'm not painting it reflective as latex anyways, and I'm not like painting it as a diffusing rubber either. So I don't mind the texture for that reason. Also, I generally actually don't mind it at all. It's not like I don't enjoy looking at something being smooth, but for me, if it goes too smooth and too perfect, like kind of if you have a transition and then glaze over it 10 times or something, so it goes like incredibly smooth. It's not easy to get that effect, and it takes a lot of work and time, but I just enjoy it more, and I feel like it almost kind of has a bit more life when it has a bit of texture to it, even though it is tiny texture that you can barely pick it up, it still has some life to it. So those are kind of the reasons why I'm not too hung up getting it like incredibly smooth. So the way I'm blending it out, you can see here how I'm dotting and scratching over the kind of transitions. So it is kind of like almost like a micro stippling or something to that extent. You can see here how I'm going for the brightest color because where I'm ending up putting it in a second is right where I have the brightest on the armor. That means I also want the most light to catch there on the fabric or leather. So I'm touching right where I want it to be the very brightest, which was that like very top, almost up to the wrist, and then blending it out towards the like going for the cylindrical shape. The model itself has like the lighting on it is a top light with the lean a bit to the left. So you can see the left side of her is very bright, like the left side of those two stomach plates or whatever, and also on the chest it's leaning a bit left, and then you can see the top of the kind of like the cylindrical shape of like the arm is basically just a long cylinder. If you just kind of ignore the individual shapes of the armor plates, it's like a long cylinder. So light would kind of travel down the length of that cylinder. And then of course I am rendering like the armor plates as like in the shape that they are, but with keeping in mind that it's part of something like a bigger volume. So that's also how I'm rendering the fabrics. You can see that like that arm piece, I mean, some of these areas are so small that you're basically only looking, is it just beside an armor panel that has a lot of light on it? If yes, then you take it bright. If no, you don't. Because you can't do too much of a transition or anything on that tiny piece with the, like, that's just between the two stomach plates or anything. You can do a bit, but it's very hard. But on also here on the leg, I put the brightest color on there, and then now I'm kind of going back and toning it down a bit and smoothing it out. It was a bit rough before, not massively so, but it was a tiny bit rough before. And now I'm going back, dipping into the mid-tone and then kind of scratching over. So the paints on the wet palette, it is a bit hard explaining consistency. Two reasons. One is it is getting kind of hot here where I'm painting, not massively so, but because it's also like in a dry climate, means that the wet palette will dry out, and at some point there is a clip and you can see that it has dried out even more, and I had to add quite a lot of water to it, like to the puddles, and mix in them again. So they will change the look. But that's kind of one thing. But another thing is, you're not going exactly for a consistency, because it's not it's not really exactly about the consistency, but more about opacity. But the easiest way to explain the opacity is by referring to a consistency. So if you're at about like a milk consistency, 50-50 water to paint, generally that's about where you want to be, but don't get too hung up about it, because you can have some paints where the pigments don't color too much. For example, even though Rhinoxide is quite dark, it's not like it makes that opaque of a mark. If you put in a bit of water, it gets pretty translucent quickly. So that is one color where you might not put as much water as another one. And like some colors, some brands, and even like colors within brands do tend to put a lot of are pretty opaque. So you would need to add a bit more water then. That's all just to say that you want to make a mark, but you don't want it to be a hard mark unless you're specifically going for that. So yeah, that's kind of one of the things to consider when doing the blending. Another thing is, because the brush is very, very small, you don't keep a lot of paint in the bristles, which is quite important, because you don't want to flood the area you're painting. You never want to flood it. I mean, of course, if you're doing a wash, you would want to, but in any other case, basically, you don't want to flood the area at all. And to avoid that, you wick off the excess amount of paint. You can see I'm doing it on my thumb. You can do it on kitchen roll, or I would say a wet piece of or damp piece of kitchen roll is the most ideal. But just be sure to wick it off. So that's kind of like, don't have too much paint on the bristles. Also, when you're looking at me doing the strokes, I'm always touching the brush where I know I want it to be quite light anyways. And then I kind of start, go into, for example, if I want to put a line, I put it where I know I want it to be bright, and then I work my way out from there doing that line, so I don't accidentally make a mark that is too hard. So you can see where I'm kind of concentrating the light here on the part of like the fabric that is up towards the wrist, going all the way down into kind of like the bicep. You can just about see the bicep and the chest muscle going into the armpit. Then on the top of basically the hip, where the leg plate goes up to the gem, I'm putting a bit of a bright spot down towards where I'm painting right now. I'm not taking it all the way up in brightness. I'm just putting it there for basically readability, so you can see the volume better. And then I'm keeping like the top of the thigh, like just towards the knee on the other leg, quite bright, because it's pointed up towards directly up towards the light source. So those are kind of the main areas I'm keeping the light. And then I'm trying to blend it out by going back and forth between the colors. And I'm basically looking for, if I think the transition is a bit harsh, then I'm looking, do I want to cut into this, like the brighter reflections, or am I like trying to make it even like a bit bigger? If it's a case of wanting to make it bigger, I go for the brightest of the two colors in that, like the transition line. If I want to cut into it, I go for the darker one. And then I'm kind of scratching over that line. It is kind of a jagged line because it's so small. I'm doing all those like stipply, scratchy motions. So all the lines are going to be like kind of jagged. But the idea is that you kind of get a transition line, and you wanna blend that out by stippling over it or scratching over it with the brighter or darker color, depending on if you, as I said, want to cut into it or if you want to make it even brighter. Here, I wasn't too terribly happy with how it looked and the size of the reflection, so I just went back and dotted over it a bit more. And again, what I'm saying is, here you can see I go back to the brightest color, making sure that it is as bright and as big as I want that reflection to be, because I just a second ago went over it with the mix that is like not the brightest but the second brightest, which means it kind of lost a bit of its power or brightness, and now I'm going back and just reinforcing it again. So yeah, it is a lot of back and forth blending these out, just looking if I'm happy with it. Also, I will have to go back because, I mean, painting under the like recording and painting is a bit hard, especially when you're like trying to blend everything out. So I take it fairly far, but I mean, this is not for competition or anything, but I want it to look very good anyways. So I am going back between like basically everything when I'm recording. It doesn't matter if it's for YouTube or Patreon or whatever. I'm taking it kind of as far as it makes sense to do and is kind of possible for me while recording. And then as I stop recording, I will go back and just neat some things up. And yeah, it is very small tweaks, but I am doing that. I'm just saying it so you guys know that I definitely can't do my very best work under the camera, but I can do very good work under it to show what I'm doing. And mostly it will just be doing more of exactly that to make it be a bit neater and tighter. So here I'm on the backside. As you can see, I haven't painted too much of the backside yet. And I mean, it's not like she's not very big, and a fair amount of this will be covered by hair. But this is one of these areas where I've left the hair off, because otherwise I would definitely not be able to get into this and make it look nice. So I'm doing exactly the same here on the backside as I did on the front. I have it was Rhinox hide in the beginning, and then what I didn't show you was me just painting in some of the first mix before going to the next one. So I'm showing you, well, I guess basically the two like the last two brightest mixes, how I'm applying those. And here you can see what I was talking about, those creases. And that's why I'm thinking it must be some kind of fabric. Even though I have seen it being rendered in the same bright, like cream color of the official scheme. But yeah, I'm painting it as fabric at least. So here you can see I'm kind of roughly blocking in like a bright spot on that cheek, and then running down the length of the leg. I'm choosing like having the light the way I am because like the cheek is basically a sphere, which means it will have a bright spot, a very rounded bright spot. So how to know how bright to take it is kind of the tricky part. And when I'm saying how bright to take it, I mean, I know I'm going to the brightest mix, but brightness is also like the size of that reflection. And that's what I'm saying is kind of the tricky part. And I was actually also unsure, so I am building that up and like just going back and forth, looking, okay, do I think it's bright enough compared with the leg? The leg I'm rendering, basically as a cylinder, not basically as a cylinder, with the light traveling down the length of it, from like just under the butt, going downwards, and then I'm not taking it all the way, and then I'm like having those creases in the like on the back of the knee be bright too. So now I've kind of blocked it in. I was just looking from the other side just to make sure that you could see it if you were looking from a slight side view. Here, because I put that first initial layer of like on top of the Rhinox hide, I put that the mix that is like one step brighter, and it wasn't blended super well, so it had kind of a bit of a transition line going on there, but also it was actually a bit too bright, so it lost a bit of its shadow because I basically put too large of an area in that color. So here you can see I'm just going back with quite thinned down Rhinox hide, and then kind of like staple scratchy, almost kind of half glazing over the area just to blend it out a bit. And this is like basically the idea I'm doing for blending out all of it, is that also here you can see I'm going in, swirling in the edge of that puddle, taking most of the paint off again from the bristles, and then then I'm stippling over and scratching over a bit with depositing like more and more of the paint. And as I deposit more, the marks get softer, so I can cut into the brighter area. Then you can see here how I'm dragging from the bright area or the bright reflection outwards into the shadow. And I'm doing that very deliberately because you can see I'm picking up a bit of moisture from the wet palette and putting on top of it, because it, as I said, the wet palette is drying out a bit. So it's kind of on its final leg, I guess. But yeah, I'm very deliberately dragging from the bright area into the dark, because where you put down the brush and drag it out to, or drag it over to, when you take your brush off of the model, that is exactly where it will deposit the most like pigment. So if you're doing a line, where you're ending the line is where the most pigment, you can kind of see it there. And then I'm going back and just feathering it out a bit by kind of like stabbing on that like kind of spot where I'm lifting the brush off. So yeah, I'm very mindful of how I'm putting these dots and marks and where I'm dragging. So you basically want to drag and end where you want the most of your current color to be deposited. So of course, if you're going with like you're blending out something with your darker color, like blending from light to dark, you want to drag from the light into the dark, and the other way around. If I'm going from like having a dark and then I want to brighten it up, then I'm putting the brush right where like the dark is, and then dragging it over the transition into the light area, which means I'm now depositing the most paint in the light area. Here you can see I'm basically micro scratching, micro stippling over. I'm doing that quite often when it's something like a rounded shape, because it is a bit hard to, like, where do you drag the brush like to and from. So it is kind of my go-to when I'm blending out these rounded shapes, to do that micro scratchy stipply technique. It is, as I said before, fairly blended out, fairly smooth, but I don't want it to be exactly like 100% smooth with no texture at all. I just want it to be like as neat as possible. Here you can see I'm again going over a transition I can see, and it is really even hard to see on video, and I mean it is a bit hard to see in real life too, but because of the magnification I can kind of tell that it's there, which means of course I want to blend it out if possible. I generally have like kind of a rule of thumb, in the sense that if it looks good with 2 times magnification and under like the harsh painting desk light, it will probably look pretty good in hand, because even if you took it to a competition or something, the judges won't be looking at your piece with magnification on it. Anyway, so they can't tell if there is a tiny bit of micro texture there from dotting or stippling or whatever, if you can't even see it with the magnification on. Here you see I actually took some of the Rhinox hide again, watered it down a fair bit, and then kind of did a micro glaze over the creases on the backside of the knee, because I thought they were a bit bright, and I wanted to dull some of it down. And it's very easy. If you accidentally go too bright, you can just go in, like make a glaze of either the shadow or the mid-tone, and then glaze over whatever area is a bit too bright. So this is the end of this video. I hope you liked it, and I will catch you in the next one.